I took a gap semester a couple of years ago and decided that I should take a road trip with a buddy of mine who was also taking a semester off from school. We're from the Midwest and planned our trip to take a big circle from Ohio to LA, up to Portland and then back home. We're outdoorsy guys, so we knew we were trying to hit some wilderness along the way. So, we're about a month into the trip and leaving Portland, where we were taking a break from camping every night while on the road. Itching to get back on the road and into the wilderness, my body finds a hike that looks interesting. It was an abandoned railroad about 2 hours east of Portland. He had found the GPS coordinates on some site, maybe Reddit, and it said that there was an abandoned railroad with a couple of tunnels and a massive trestle that spanned a huge gorge. Sounds cool, I'm in. So, we drive my Volvo station wagon towards these coordinates. If you've never been to Oregon, it's beautiful, foggy, never-ending views of thick pine forests. The type of place that you can barely see 20 feet in any direction because of how dense the trees are. For the last hour of this 2-hour drive, we're driving on dirt logging roads, haven't passed a single car or seen any sign of life since turning off a rural highway. It was creepy, endless dark forest for hours. Stop! I hit the brakes. My body is squinting at his phone. Looks like we're at the coordinates. I pull to the side of the 1-lane road and put the Volvo in park. Dense trees are still all around us, but I can see up ahead that there is a linear gap in the canopy. I guess that's the railroad. We hop out of the car and I load up my day pack with my camera, headlamp, water, and pepper spray and knife. After a second thought, I put the knife in my pocket. This railroad has been abandoned for about 50 years. This means that while you can still see the tracks while standing on them, thick brush has filled in the entire swath that is typically cleared on either side of the tracks, except for a foot-wide path that has been maintained by deer, elk, bear, and maybe some humans. I notice my buddy is also looking at a private property sign that is fading into a tree nearby. He looks at me and I shrug. We start walking. The tracks are dead straight. This means that we can see a couple of 100 yards down the center of this green tunnel of vegetation, as if I'm in a very narrow alleyway that never ends. To either side, I can hardly see 10 feet. We walked and walked. Honestly, a boring hike, considering there was no view and it was dead straight. But we knew that the tunnel was up ahead, so we kept going. I kept myself busy by trying to pace my stride with each railroad tie. Step after step, we walk about 3 miles away from the car into the woods. Suddenly, I stop and my body bumps into my backpack. I had just looked up from my feet and was staring into a looming tunnel in front of us, covered in moss. The entrance surrounded a black hole that went right into the mountainside. Again, we shrugged and turned on our headlamps before walking in. Graffiti covered what wasn't covered with moss, and moss was starting to cover areas that were covered by graffiti. Our headlamps dimly lit walls, covered with fairly creepy graffiti. I stared eye to eye with a 20-foot tall mummy head that was made with white paint. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face because it was so dark, and we couldn't yet see the end of the tunnel. And my buddy and I quickly walked down the tracks in silence. I had my knife out at my side. I was relieved to get out. From the exit of the tunnel, I could already see a massive gorge up ahead. The tracks went across a wooden bridge that screamed P&W. It was easy to forget about the creepiness of the tunnel, and I looked forward to busting out my camera. Once I set foot on the bridge, however, I realized the danger of crossing something that hasn't been maintained in 50 or so years. The wood was clearly aged and in some places rotten, but the views were incredible. We balanced on the steel tracks and walked to the center of the trestle, where we could see a river about 500 feet below. Horrible logging scarred the mountainsides along the gorge. I noticed places where the boards had broken through. I hoped that nobody had fallen. Instead of turning back after getting some good shots, We kept going. The sun was getting into a late afternoon angle and was blocked by the steep mountains around us. We quickly walked off the bridge and back into our green tunnel. For some reason, I started having some second thoughts. I don't know why they came now, but I slowed my pace and started thinking about how I would ask my body to turn around. Before I was gonna turn around and ask Nate, I glanced up at the tracks ahead and directly into someone's eyes about 200 yards away, and feel a cold rush to my hands and head. The person staring at me has stopped too. I see another man's head poke around his. "There's two of them," I whisper back to Nate. Slowly, we start walking down the green tunnel towards the men, away from our car, miles behind us. They are walking towards us, towards our car, miles behind us. As we got closer, I walk faster out of fear. Bouncing on the man's chest is a large bush knife. He's wearing filthy clothes, has long matted hair, and has not broken eye contact. A revolver is tucked into his pants, and he's carrying a rifle with a magazine. At this point, it's too late to turn back, and I realize that my buddy and I are gonna have to squeeze by these men on the narrow gap between the tracks. The brush is pulling up my sleeves on either side of the tracks. "How's it going?" I nervously ask as I squeeze by the men while avoiding eye contact. I count 4 guns and a stench of BO. I'm unsettled by the way these guys look, and I got a feeling that I've never felt around anyone else before. They say nothing and push past us. I keep hurrying away, and before I know, they're out of sight when I look behind me and past Nate. I turn to Nate and give him my "what the fuck" face. After walking silently for 10 minutes, we stop. I don't know what to say. I don't want to walk deeper into the woods, but I also don't want to go back towards where the creepy dudes are going and back to our car. Suddenly, loud moaning and shrieking starts coming from the dense woods of the side of the tracks. It sounds like it's about 100 yards away. It doesn't sound completely human, but it sounds like it's in agony. That was the final straw. We bolt back towards the cars. I'm not a runner, but we ran back over the bridge, through the black tunnel, and through the endless green that surrounded us. Finally, I see the logging road up ahead where our car is parked. I stop running when I hear a truck idling. I can start to see it through the brush. A big, old F-350 lifted pickup truck idling right behind my car. My station wagon looks comically small in comparison. I can see the 2 men sitting in the truck with their doors open and guns out, staring directly at us, waiting. Nate and I shrug to each other again, but this time with fear in our eyes. "Just get in the car," I stammer to Nate. We hop in, and I stare at the men in our rearview mirror. We wait. My heart is pounding. Are they gonna kill us? That was what I was thinking. My knife and pepper spray are useless. After waiting what felt like an hour, the men haven't taken their eyes off of us. We can't back up given how close they are behind us. I notice a fairly solid looking shoulder to the road to my right and decide that I should try to pull a quick U-turn and get away. So that's what I did. Turned the wheel all the way and floored it. Thankfully, my car made the turn and was able to clear the back of their truck. We drove as fast as we could down the logging road in silence. No truck behind us. Our dust plume rose up and hid the scene that we'd just been in. I drove all the way to Idaho that night and had my eyes on the rearview mirror the whole time. I don't know what those guys' intentions were, but I hope I never see them again. My mum and I moved into a completely normal average house when I was about 15. Everything was fine. We loved it. One day, I was home sick from school and I was messing around on my computer when I heard our garage door open. I was freaked out and went down the hall to get my mobile phone and saw the hallway door that connects to the garage opening. I panicked and yelled, "Get out!" And two young boys slammed the door and ran off. I started crying and called my mum. I don't know why I didn't call the police first. My mum then told me to go to my neighbor's, and she was going to come home from work. When she got home, she was speaking to my neighbor for a bit. She, the neighbor, ended up telling us that she thought it was probably the young boy that lived in the house before us. Apparently he sometimes goes around to everyone's houses and breaks in and eats their food and watches TV and stuff. And for whatever reason, they were all okay with that. Apparently, he came from some sort of a broken home and they all felt sorry for him, so they didn't call the police. Mum and I were completely unsettled by that and put new locks on all the doors that week. We didn't care if the other neighbors were okay with that. We weren't. A few months pass and nothing ever happens again. We figure that he knows that we're not cool with this weirdness and doesn't try to break in again. A week or so later, I'm in bed, asleep, and I wake up in the middle of the night for no reason at all. I'm not hot or cold. I don't need to pee. I didn't have a nightmare. I just woke up. I had this incredibly uneasy and weird feeling wash over me. I felt like something or someone was watching me, and I got completely freaked out. I went into my mum's room and slept in her bed that night. It kept happening a few nights, and I thought I was just having nightmares or was getting scared of the dark for some reason. I ended up sleeping in my mum's bed for about a week because I was so legit scared of the dark now. And I finally worked up the courage to sleep in my bed one night, but I could barely sleep. I felt totally uneasy, unnervous, and scared. I got to sleep for a bit, but then I woke up again. I looked outside of my window, and I could swear that I saw a figure of someone standing there. Obviously, I noped the fuck out and ran back to my mum. One of the nights I was back in her bed. We were all asleep and feeling fine, when I wake up to my dog on the end of the bed, growling. Now, our dog is an old golden retriever and has never growled or barked at anything. She's a huge wuss and completely placid. She has no problems with strangers, and even if someone's knocking on the door and comes in, she couldn't care less. So, I wake up, all dazed, confused, and half asleep. I hear the dog growling, and I'm asking her what's wrong. I look up from the bed, and I shit you not, there is a man standing in the doorway with a knife. I screamed like a banshee, and the dog started barking at this point. Mum woke up and saw the man too. He went running down the hallway and out of the back door. I'm crying my eyes out. The dog is barking her face off, and Mum is frantically trying to call the police. An hour later, they finally get here, and of course, the dude is gone. Morning comes, and we go outside to see that the back gate has had its lock cut with bolt cutters, and the door leading into the house had been smashed in. The cops come in and dust for fingerprints and leave shit everywhere, but at the end of the day, they can't and don't do anything. We moved out that same day and went to live with my grandmother and grandfather until we found a new house. Pretty much no one in the family believed us, or they thought that we were making it up for attention. My family are assholes. A few weeks later, we get a call from the police and they manage to match the fingerprints to some teenager who just got arrested for breaking into another house. It's the same guy that was breaking into all of the houses in the neighborhood and used to live in the house we're in. So, Mum's talking to the cops and some of the neighbors, when suddenly someone tells us, completely casually, "Oh yeah, that's the Milat kid." Wait, did they just say Milat? Yeah, pretty much any Australian will know this last name, Ivan Milat, the notorious serial killer. His nephew was breaking into people's homes and our home. While we were sleeping, he broke into our home with a knife, and people were somehow okay with that. So anyway, we moved into a new house and forget all about it. Until about 3 years ago, Milat's nephew, the kid that broke into our place, gets a 43-year jail sentence. The link to the news article is in the description of this video. He and his friend murdered another teenager in the same fucking place that his uncle dumped all of those bodies. So, the guy that broke into our house watched me while I was asleep and stood in our bedroom doorway with a knife while we were sleeping, actually murdered another teenager a few years later. Mum and I nearly fell over when we heard about it. No one really believes us, which pisses me off. But it really happened. Sometimes, when I think back on what could have happened if I slept in my own bed that night, or if the dog didn't bark, or if we never woke up, it really freaks me out. And it's also left me with a huge fear of the dark. I get really uneasy if I have to go outside at night by myself, or if I wake up in the middle of the night. Sometimes, I have a panic attack when I go outside to put the bins outside at night. So, back when I was still in high school, my dad left my mum and I and went to live with his friend about an hour and a half from us. And I was 15 when this happened, and I'm now 24, and neither of my parents will tell me why my dad left. Anyway, after my dad left, my mum lost her job because my dad took the only car that we had, and we ended up living in a motel a couple of towns over from the town that we used to live in. Even though we lived in a different town, I still went to school in my old town. They would pick me up in a bus or van and bring me to and from school. A few months after living in the motel, I met this friend in school named Randy. He was really cute, and we got along really well. Near the middle of the school year, my dad had a warrant out for his arrest because he hadn't paid child support for my other siblings in a long time because he couldn't afford to. So obviously, he ended up getting arrested. He spent 90 days in jail about a mile down the road from the motel that my mum and I were in. And when he got out, he came and stayed with us again. Near the end of the school year, I was at one of my friend's houses when I got a call from my dad telling me that we got an apartment in the town that I go to school in. I was so excited and happy. Few months go by and things are going smoothly, when Randy and I decided that we wanted to hang out outside of school for the first time. I didn't hang out with anyone outside of school, ever, because if I missed the bus that would take me from the school to the motel, then I would be stuck with no way home and nowhere to stay. Randy was pretty much my only friend at the time. So I thought, yeah, let's hang out. We decided that we would drop our stuff off at my house and then go and do whatever until one of us eventually had to go home. So we start walking home from school and we got onto my street when Randy says, "Hey, I used to live on this street a few months ago." And I asked him which house he lived in and he gave me my house and apartment number. I thought it was pretty cool that he used to live in the house that I live in now. Let's skip forward a few weeks. Randy and I would hang out pretty often and grew pretty close. But then he told me he wanted more and he wanted to go out with me. My boyfriend and I broke up a few weeks after I moved back to town and I was then pregnant with his baby. I was now 16 and pregnant, so I told him that and that I wasn't looking for a relationship because of my situation. He said he understood and that we could just be friends. But now, every time we hang out, he would try and pull a move on me. But it wasn't anything huge like kissing me or trying to have sex with me. He would just always tell me how beautiful I was and how my ex was an idiot for not being with me or try and hold my hand or put his arm around me. I told him every time to knock it off and that I wasn't comfortable with what he was doing, and he would stop and wouldn't do anything again for a few days. Things were going good and Randy was keeping his hands in flirts to himself. Until one day we were hanging out at my house on a rainy day. We were sitting on my bed watching YouTube videos when I started having stomach pains, so I decided to lay down. We continued with me laying on my back and him sitting next to me for about 20 minutes. But then, the pain got worse, so I rolled over and pulled my knees up, and then I felt him put his arm around me and put his body against mine, basically spooning me. I sat up real fast and asked him what the hell he was doing, and he just kinda stared at me for a minute and then tried to kiss me. I completely freaked out at this point and pushed him off of my bed because I have PTSD and it makes me freak the fuck out when people touch me, and he knew this very well. So I started flipping out on him a little bit and made him leave. After he left, I locked all the doors and told him that I didn't want to see him anymore, and then blocked him on everything. Things were going good for a while. My ex blocked me when I told him that I was pregnant because he thought I was lying to try and trap him into the relationship, even though I was the one that broke up with him, and I had several positive pregnancy tests. And then once I got my first ultrasound, I had a mutual friend of ours send a picture of it to him, and it had my name on it and everything, including how old the baby was. He unblocked me and told me he believed I was pregnant now, and was helping out with what he could, coming to appointments with me and looking for a job and all that. He wanted to get back together with me, but I refused, saying that I only wanted him as the father of my baby. He would be nothing more. The point in all of this is that we became good friends again, and I ended up telling him what Randy did, and he did not take it well. He immediately messaged him, and they set up for a fight for the next day in the school auditorium. Stupid, right? They both got suspended, obviously, and I found out that my ex is a horrible fighter. A few days after the fight, I had a miscarriage. I was out of school for a couple of weeks now, obviously, and word got around pretty quickly because now my ex was once again telling everyone that I wasn't actually pregnant and I was lying to try and trap him, even though he had come to the appointments where I had ultrasounds and I had a little baby bump as I was 3.5 months along, and I'm a very petite girl. So everyone in school started to hate me, and people started bullying me and messaging me, telling me how awful I am and all that. So things were not going well for me. Randy beat the fuck out of my ex for this. Like, I'm talking put him in the hospital. I was scared. I don't know why he did that or anything. So one night I woke up to the sound of someone in my room. I turned my light on and there's Randy sitting in the chair in my room. I was home alone, so I was terrified. I asked him what the hell he was doing in my house and how the hell did he get inside. He told me he came in through the back door because apparently it's easy to pick the lock to the bottom door and the top door doesn't have a lock, and my parents didn't think it was necessary to put one there. Now, to clarify, I'm on the second floor and we have a back porch with a door that leads to the stairs that leads to another door in the house. So anyway, I started to freak out and told him to leave. I started screaming at him because all of the stuff that had been happening to me all this time is now coming out. I started crying and he rushed over to me and tried to hold me. Then I shoved him away and he got angry and pulled out a knife. Now I was really scared. He started screaming at me about how he just wanted to love me and be there for me, and I just kept hurting him and he didn't deserve that. You know, truly delusional, obsessed person talk. So I start trying to talk to him and get him to calm down. He's listening, and I start slowly turning us around, so now I'm near the door and he's not. He realizes this and grabs me and tells me that I'm not going anywhere. Now he's really angry, and he's telling me about how now he really sees that I don't see how good he is for me, and that just won't do. And if he can't have me, no one can. He starts freaking out, saying stuff like, "What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?" And in his mini freak out, he turns away from me. I grab something and just start beating him with it. But he's not going down. He's just taking the hits like nothing's happening and just lunges at me with the knife. I dodged him, but he still got me. By now, I have a nice big slice on my side. That caught me off guard, so while I was distracted, he got up and just fucking kicked me in the back, so hard that I flew a few feet. That hurt so bad and knocked the wind out of me. So I was just laying there thinking that I'm gonna die. Now he's walking all slow towards me, saying how I shouldn't have done that and now I'll pay and whatnot. When all of a sudden, a cop kicks in the door and tackles him, and another one comes and scoops me out and carries me off into the street, while about 6 more huge cops run to my room. I was taken to the hospital and treated, and I found out later on that he was on MDMA, and it took 7 cops and being tased 4 times to take him down. Thanks to my neighbor though for hearing my distress and calling the cops. If only they had gotten there sooner and not stood at the downstairs front door knocking, waiting for me to answer. Cops in my area are stupid and don't really care about their jobs. At the time he was only 15, so he didn't go to jail. He got 5 years probation and 6 months community service. But his family moved away after that, and I haven't seen him since, thankfully. I've recovered nicely, as the most damage that was done to me was that I had a huge nasty black and blue bruise covering most of my back for a couple of months, and a cut. But the cut wasn't too deep, and he didn't kick hard enough to do any severe damage, so I'm fine now. I hope I never see that crazy guy again. I'm a 32-year-old female, and this is something that happened to me only 2 nights ago. My husband Kevin and I were on the porch smoking a cigarette. It was about 9 o'clock at night. We live in the woods, right off of a stretch of a highway that's between 2 interstate exits. We're looking up at the stars, enjoying the quiet atmosphere of the crickets, glad to have a temporary relief from all of the usual traffic noise. I heard something and shushed my husband, and even though he hadn't said anything. Was that screaming? Yes, it was a woman screaming like nothing I'd ever heard before. And it sounded like she was getting murdered. And in between blood-chilling screams, she was screaming out, "Help me, help me." I look at my husband. We were both really freaked out. The more she screamed, the closer she was getting to the house. I could eventually see a figure running along the median of the highway, making their way closer to the part of the highway that was in front of our house. Our house is a good ways back from our driveway, but not far enough that you can't see anything. If we could see her, that meant that she could see us. Me being selfish and worrying about my 3 children in the house, one of which is a newborn, I turned the porch light off. We had no yard security lights. Stupid, I know. So, we were in complete darkness. We could still see the highway perfectly fine due to the house across from us who still had their Christmas lights up. I threw my cig in my yard and back up to stand in the driveway of the house, pulling out my phone to call 911. She's still in the median of the road, screaming. If anyone else in the surrounding houses heard her, they pretended like they didn't. Kevin runs past me inside to get his jacket and shoes. I tell him not to go out there, but he ignores me and gets dressed anyway. As soon as he's out of sight, I see a red car barrel up the road and pull over next to where the lady was. With her in the median, there was still a stretch of highway between them. There was a man driving. I couldn't see what he looked like, I only heard his voice. He was yelling that he was going to kill her and calling her all sorts of words. It looked like he was throwing stuff at her out of the window, maybe clothes. As soon as she sees him pull over, she starts running straight towards our yard. By that time I was already on the phone with the police officers, but as I said, I live out in the woods, pretty far out of town I'll add. So, it would take them a while to get there. I yell for my husband. I tell my 9-year-old son to go in our room where the baby is and close the door. He can hear the whole thing and was pretty frightened as well. My husband runs out onto the porch and into the yard towards her. He asks if she's okay, and she says that she's gotten a ride home from a guy, and halfway down the road, he started acting really creepy. He refused to let her out where she told him to, and kept driving with her in the car. She looked behind her seat, pretending to look at a car behind them, and saw a roll of duct tape. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the moving car and just started running down the road, screaming for help. Kevin starts to lead her towards the house, and by now is also on the phone calling the police, having gathered more information that I wasn't able to give them when I had called the police. They told him to stay on the line with them until an officer showed up. He lets her in the house and her face looks terrible. She's red and bleeding in a couple of spots, road rash from when she jumped out. She also said that he had hit her before she was able to escape. She came in and we locked her door, knob, deadbolt and chain. We stood together near the window waiting for the police to show up, Kevin giving updates and answering questions on the phone. I was trying not to freak out, when all of a sudden there was loud banging on our door. The man was yelling, "I know you're in there. I saw you running. The people in there can't protect you." And I shouted through the door that he needed to leave our property, and if he was smart, to get in his car and drive off. I told him that we were on the phone with the police. The answer he gave was chilling to say the least. He shouts back, "Go ahead, call the police, I don't care. They won't be here in time." He keeps knocking on the door over and over again. The woman was freaking out and crying, saying that she needed help. I ran to the kitchen to get a large knife just in case. We had a huge, solid iron door, but our windows were easily breakable. If he wanted to get in badly enough, he certainly could. My husband just came from our bedroom with his gun when a squad car pulled up in the yard. 2 more following behind it, and 1 across the street where his car was. They tended to the woman and got her home safely. Turns out, she lives only across the highway from us, 5 houses to the left. And it had been 2 hours later and they still hadn't found him. There are a lot of places to hide in these woods. I just hope that he hides far away from here. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I'd been at a friend's all evening watching films and chilling, and I left to go home at around 11 p.m. It was quite a long walk back to mine, as she lived on the outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe, as when it got to a certain time of night, it was really quiet. You wouldn't bump into anybody, and there would hardly be any cars on the roads, especially at that late hour. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with 2 big blocks of houses like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and a vicarage. As I'm passing the vicarage, I see this little beat up red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it gets, the more it slows down, and the guy is nearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me and I started to panic. There was not another soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself in a tiz, so I picked up the piece and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he drove off. I continued walking home, which was literally a 5-minute straight line from there, and I kept listening out for a car engine and was vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mum stood at the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car when for some reason she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtain, and she takes the phone from her ear and says, "What? That car?" This all happened in a period of a minute since walking through the front door, and I'm thinking to myself that it can't be him, because if he had followed me, I would have heard the car. Before I even get a chance to look for myself, there is a knock at the front door. So I go and answer it, only pulling it open a few inches. And there is this guy, stood there, empty-handed, wearing a baseball cap. It was the same guy, the same car. And I'm just like, what the hell? "Can I help you?" I say. "Did you order a pizza?" he asks me, and I tell him no, and that he might have the wrong address. Taking a step towards me, he says again, in a not fucking around kinda tone, "No, I said, did you order a pizza?" Before I could even reply, my mum has come up behind me and opened the door fully and says, "Is there a problem?" This causes him to back up, mumbling, I must have the wrong address, sorry," before he gets into his car and takes off immediately. This was all strange. We were really spooked, and we made sure all the doors and all the windows were locked after this. I hope I never see that man again.